Alright guys, again it's jerningam here. Even though my YouTube's gone down, I'm still going to keep making videos for you guys. So the video what we're going to be doing now is going to be looking at Parliament, UK, Brexit.
The Prime Minister spent the morning schooling the next generation on good governance, while the crisis surrounding his decision to suspend Parliament deepens. Boris Johnson told the children he hadn't always wanted to lead the country, he wanted to be a rock star. Bowie, Bono, Boris, back to Brexit.
We're not going to worry about Brexit. We're going to go on anyway and do all the things that we think the UK needs right now.
Johnson's opponents are getting ready to fight his decision to prorogue or suspend Parliament and prevent a no-deal Brexit, a move Johnson believes will only make leaving the EU without a deal inevitable.
The more the parliamentarians try to block the no-deal Brexit, the more likely it is that we'll end up in that situation. So the best thing now is for us to get on and make our points to our European friends with clarity and with vigour, and that's what we're doing.
A string of legal battles are underway to challenge Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament. In Scotland, 74 politicians from different political parties urged Scotland's highest court to halt the suspension. The judge refused to immediately put the brakes on Johnson's plan, but he did agree to a full hearing next week to look at the legality of the suspension more closely.
If we do not ultimately win this case, what does it say about the British Constitution that a Prime Minister with a majority of one and with no majority for a no-deal Brexit can simply suspend Parliament to get what he wants? That's what happens in dictatorships.
In London, another legal challenge has been launched by the prominent political campaigner and EU supporter Gina Miller. It has the backing of leading MPs and the former Conservative Prime Minister John Major. Miller won a landmark victory against the previous government of Theresa May, forcing her to allow MPs to choose if and when to activate the Brexit process. The case begins next Thursday. A third legal battle is underway in Northern Ireland, where the impact of a no-deal Brexit on peace in the region is under scrutiny. Campaigners in Belfast argue that a no-deal Brexit threatens the Good Friday Agreement secured 20 years ago. The deal brought an end to decades of violence. With legal challenges either underway or pending across the country, MPs opposed to Boris Johnson say they will return to Parliament next week, and in the words of the opposition Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, legislate quickly to block the prospects of a no-deal Brexit. But time, of course, is running out, with the prorogation, the suspension expected to start as early as the 9th of September and no later than the 12th. MPs are even suggesting that they will work through the weekend, something they've only done a handful of times since the Second World War. They will do what it takes, they say, to block Boris Johnson. Steve Barker, Al Jazeera,
Well,
London.
I'm still going to keep doing videos like this, guys, so don't you worry. I'm not going to be a ghost, and I'm still going to be appearing on PS4 until this problem fixes itself with the YouTube problem. So let's have a look here. What else we can film? So some people would say it's not all bad, but this is what I'm doing at the moment: is doing videos, short videos for the time being.
It was clear that Jimmy Alderwood was in distress once he got to Iraq.
I begged them, I said, please, I've never seen that country, I've never been there, however, they forced me, I'm here now, and I don't understand the language, basic, I've been sleeping in the street, I'm diabetic, I take insulin shots, I've been throwing up, sleeping in the street, trying to find something to
I'm not live streaming at the minute. I'm pre-recording videos to put onto YouTube, guys, so don't get it wrong, like.
This was the first to foretell the death of a man whose lawyers had warned that deportation to Iraq could be fatal. He was deported in June. 63 days later, he was dead.
He was on a bench in this airport in Najaf with basically just the clothes on his back, with nothing. He had no food, he had no water, he had nothing. An airport official took pity on him, gave him some food, called his family, and that's how they found out that he had been deported. It was incredibly, incredibly cruel.
In a statement, Immigration and Customs Enforcement said Alderwood had a criminal record and so had no legal basis to remain in the US, and that he was given a full complement of medicine to ensure continuity of care. The Detroit area has one of the largest populations of those with Iraqi heritage outside of Iraq. Many, like Jimmy, are Chaldean Catholics who came to the US as refugee children. Around 1,000 green card holders currently face deportation to Iraq because they have a criminal record, no matter how minor. Even though they served their time in jail, and many, like Jimmy, have no connection to Iraq, ICE is determined to send them to a country that the State Department says no American should travel to because it's too dangerous as a result of the US invasion. And Jimmy wasn't the first to be sent back.
Of the individuals that we're in contact with, there's some individuals we don't know what happened to them. We don't know if they're alive or they're dead. The individuals that we've spoken to, many of them are in terrible situations. They are in hiding. Some have been assaulted. Some have been shot at. We know that Jimmy obviously died.
Many in the Chaldean community supported Donald Trump in the 2016 election, encouraged by pledges of social conservatism and the protection of religious minorities abroad.
Nearly 90,000 Chaldean registered voters. He won the state by 10,000 or so absolutely it could impact the election.
And it's not just Iraqis like Jimmy who face deportation to countries with which they have no connection. Several Asian and African countries are being pressured to accept deportees, even though they too would face an uncertain future in countries they don't know.
One other thing I wanted to say about Jimmy is that, we were speaking to him shortly before his death. He really wanted to share his story as a way to make sure that other people wouldn't experience what he experienced.
Shia Bratansi, Al Jazeera, Detroit, Michigan.
Well, lots of things are going on around the world.
Not one, but two former occupants of number 10 have now condemned the Prime Minister's decision to suspend Parliament. But Mr. Johnson said that MPs trying to block a no-deal departure were damaging his chances of getting a deal with the EU. Scotland's highest civil court refused another legal bid by parliamentarians to order a temporary halt to prorogation, but did agree to a full hearing on the matter next week. From Westminster, here's our correspondent, Victoria McDonald.
Hi, good morning. Hello, good morning, good morning.
You know you're getting old when even the journalists start looking young.
I have a mini forest that's made out of Lego and plastic.
The Prime Minister took questions from these school reporters ahead of an announcement of £14 billion for the education budget.
I'm an Arsenal fan. I think Arsenal will do well this season.
Right.
What makes you feel you have a good year this year?
Right.
We will tell you his response later. But after this session, he sat down for brief interviews with other broadcasters except Channel 4 News and was asked how worried he was about attempts to block him from a no-deal Brexit.
It's vital that our EU friends don't constantly think at the back of their minds, this thing could be blocked in Parliament. There's no way that the Brexit can be thwarted anyway. If they think Brexit can be blocked anyway, they're not going to give us the deal we need.
This interview was given before the former Prime Minister John Major announced that he wants to join the court action next week by the anti-Brexit campaigner Gina Miller to prevent the shutting down of Parliament. He said in a statement, "I promised that if the Prime Minister prorogued Parliament in order to prevent members from opposing his Brexit plans, I would seek judicial review of his action." This was delightedly described by some commentators as blue on blue. The Prime Minister has ordered a suspension of Parliament for up to 5 weeks before a Queen's speech on October the 14th.
What Boris Johnson has done by calling this very lengthy prorogation in the middle of a political crisis is in effect ignoring the conventions and the precedents. So that's pushing it into the courts. It's pushing us in the direction of a legal constitution, which is more like what most other countries have. So what he's done is unprecedented, and we could see potentially unprecedented action by the courts to stop him.
In the first round, however, the Scottish court today rejected a request to immediately block that suspension, though it has agreed to a full hearing on Tuesday with a similar case to be heard in Northern Ireland. And in the meantime, a second former Prime Minister, this time Gordon Brown, said following talks with several senior EU leaders, he believed the European Union will withdraw the October 31st Brexit deadline, and that could put pressure on Boris Johnson to reach a deal. Any suggestion, though, of a deal infuriated the Brexit Party, which warned they would hold the Prime Minister's feet to the fire if he does not go for a clean break.
If he's prepared to put country before party and to go for a clean break Brexit, which we believe is the right answer, the right solution, the best deal now, then we will help him, we will support him. We will not stand candidates against Conservative Party candidates if he's trying to do the right thing. If he wants to do the right thing, then we will do the right thing. But if he wants to reheat this withdrawal agreement, we will fight him in every seat to prevent that happening.
If you think this week has been a political rollercoaster, just wait until next week. That's when MPs return to the House of Commons, and when, as we understand it, those opposed to a no-deal Brexit will attempt to take control of the order papers and to, as Jeremy Corbyn put it, legislate rapidly. Which brings us back to the question from the young reporter about how the Prime Minister's year is looking. Boris Johnson said, not surprisingly, that he thinks he's going to have a good year. Once, he said, we get all this Brexit thing done.
Victoria MacDonald. Well, the SNP's Joanna Cherry led the legal challenge brought by 75 parliamentarians in Scotland's top civil court, seeking to block the Prime Minister's decision to suspend Parliament. I spoke to her earlier and began by asking her if she's looking at the courts to solve problems where politicians can't.
Well, we're looking at the courts to review the exercise of power by the executive and to prevent the executive from shutting down Parliament. So it's quite the opposite of what you say, Matt. What we're trying to do is make sure that Parliament sits for the planned length of time so that it can carry out the scrutiny of Brexit envisaged in acts of Parliament such as the EU Withdrawal Act.
Despite the suspension of Parliament, you do have a few days to get your act together. Do you think you can?
Well, clearly what the legal actions are seeking to do is to prevent Parliament from being suspended. But in the meantime, I and others are working cross-party to hatch a strategy for next week to make best use of the time that we have. So all is not lost, but the importance of the court actions is to review the legality of the Prime Minister's actions in effectively shutting down Parliament for reasons that are now in the public domain. I mean, the cat's out of the bag, given what the Defence Secretary said off camera, and indeed given interviews that Boris Johnson himself has given. The reason for shutting down Parliament is he knows he can't get his way while Parliament's sitting, so he shut it down. Now, that's the sort of thing that happens in unelected dictatorships, not in one of the oldest democracies in the world.
Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, said today that the United Kingdom was now in peril. For you, this is a bit of an opportunity, isn't it?
Well, the United Kingdom is in peril, and even if we manage to sort this mess out and to restore democracy at Westminster and to prevent a hard Brexit, Scots have looked on in horror at the events of the last 3 years. And as a series of opinion polls have recently shown, if there were to be another independence referendum, the majority of people would vote yes.
Despite all the outrage, the developments in London this week are, for the Scottish National Party, a blessing in disguise, aren't they?
A blessing in disguise for Scotland. Well, a hard Brexit could never be described as a blessing in disguise for Scotland, nor could a no-deal Brexit be described as a blessing in disguise, because the Scottish economy and Scottish society will take massive hits, and it won't be rich people like Boris Johnson, these chums, that suffer. It will be my working class constituents in Edinburgh South West who will suffer job losses and food shortages and medicine
shortages. But it gives you a much stronger case for independence. So I'm keen to prevent that from happening. But the fact of the matter, Matt, is that the case for independence exists independently of a no-deal Brexit. The case for independence exists because the events of the last 3 years since the European Union referendum have shown that Scotland is not an equal partner in the European Union. Scotland is not an equal partner in the United Kingdom. Scotland's views and Scotland's voice is not respected, and that the Westminster Parliament can run roughshod over Holyrood when it so wishes. Joanna Cherry there, the SNP. Well, in a short while we'll be speaking live to Lord Heseltine, but a little earlier I spoke to Andrew Bridgen, a member of the European Research Group, the ERG of the Conservative Party. I began by asking him if John Major is still a Conservative in his book.
I think it's disappointing that John Major's taken this action when he's actually the last Prime Minister who actually used prorogation for political purposes to avoid some sort of political scandal. But John Major can do what he wishes. The fact is we've now got a Prime Minister who's determined get us out of the European Union, deliver on the mandate of the referendum, and he's got the guts to do it.
So, if he does get a deal out of Brussels, will he support him come what may?
I'd have to look at the deal. I applaud his efforts to get the backstop removed from the withdrawal agreement, but there's far from just the backstop that's wrong with the current withdrawal agreement. What I want, and I believe Boris Johnson wants, is a Super Canada style free trade agreement. I think we can have that by triggering GATT 24, offering a quota and tariff-free trade for 10 years while we enter into detailed and comprehensive talks for a free trade agreement with the European Union, which will be the biggest customer for EU goods. 70% of all our exports should come to the UK after we leave.
But if he comes back from Brussels with something less than that, are you still prepared to pull the plug on Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, as you did on Theresa May?
I would have to have a long and very pragmatic look at whatever Boris Johnson comes back with. At the end of the day, he'll come back with whatever the European Union are willing to give us.
Now, Boris Johnson, as we all know, voted for Theresa May's deal the third time round. Do you actually trust him?
Boris is a political realist. He knows as well as I do what's required of the Conservative government. We've got to deliver on the mandate to leave the European Union. We've already missed 2 deadlines, and the country has noticed. You've seen how we dropped in the polls at the European elections, and you've seen since Boris has taken a more Eurosceptic line than his predecessor, how we've risen in the polls. We're heading for a general election. I think in the next 9 months, we have to have left the European Union, and Boris understands that.
If that Parliament votes to extend the deadline to delay Brexit yet again, should Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, ignore Parliament?
Parliament can't, as far as I can see, force the Prime Minister to ask for an extension. We have a Parliament, I think, that's a bit out of touch with the electorate. Only 160 MPs in our Parliament actually campaigned to leave, and 52% of the population voted to leave. At the end of the day, Boris Johnson's going to call the shots.
Andrew Bridgham, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your holiday.
Well, by the time this goes out, I shall already get the airport on my way back to the UK, so you can rest assured that democracy will be secured when I get back.
Bloody hell. Right, trying to find some other news to show, but protests Brexit in the
The
UK.
Prime Minister wasn't home today. Had he been, he might have felt barricaded in. Outside his doorstep, tens of thousands took to the street to protest against his decision to prorogue Parliament. What was palpable here was a real sense of anger.
Lives have been given, wars have been fought for democracy. This kind of action is not democratic. We're not going to have it.
A lot of us who actually might think that direct action.
No, this is protests in London today, yeah.
Because we've marched, we've written, we've petitioned, and no one's listened to us.
See, when you have John Major, when you have the former Chancellor taking action in the High Court against the prorogation of Parliament, that's a red line.
The largest demonstration was in Whitehall, but there were others across the UK. From Belfast to Swansea, from Glasgow to Leeds, with many saying these protests weren't just about the politics around Brexit, including Izzy, a 15-year-old schoolgirl who addressed the crowds in the capital.
I'm here today because democracy is not a partisan issue. It isn't leave versus remain. It's not even about Brexit or the EU. Democracy is about making sure all of the voices of this country are listened to.
Despite the thousands here,
This has been a peaceful demonstration by people with deeply held passions who say they are fighting against what they see as an erosion of democracy.
Boris Johnson dominated this demonstration despite his absence from it. Protesters say they want him to know they won't give up without a battle. Sejal Karia, ITV News, Downing Street.
Bloody hell. Gets bloody worse. We're on to Hong Kong.
This is one of Hong Kong's busiest shopping streets. Tonight, it was filled with flames and thick black smoke. Instead of tourists, there were protesters and police who were trying desperately to get things under control. Earlier, demonstrators gathered outside government headquarters and threw petrol bombs over the barriers that were put there to keep them out. Police fired back with tear gas and torrents of blue water. The protesters that turned out today did so in defiance of a ban.
They try to stop us to exercising our freedom of assembly and freedom of expression. And Hong Kong people are so courageous, and we will keep fighting our rights and freedom and against the evil law.
The Hong Kong situation is getting tense here, but we have to go on. We have to go on.
This is the 13th weekend of demonstrations in Hong Kong. What started as a protest against a controversial extradition bill has turned into a much broader pro-democracy movement. But while the majority want to protest peacefully, tempers are flaring up and patience on both sides is running out. Chloe Keedy, ITV News.
More tensions in Hong Kong.
You ready, young man?
Yeah, good man. Roy Flint served his country with distinction, a dozen years in uniform.
Is it right?
Assume the position. Now he fights just to get through a single day.
I'm really useless. Oh, without the carers, I'd be lost.
Okay.
He needs help to get in and out of bed, to wash and to dress, to drink and to eat, to stay alive.
It's very hard.
And he must pay, in part, for all this from his RAF pension.
With the cuts, the council have taken more money and more money. We're now left on the bones.
You served your country. Do you feel that your country is now serving you?
No, not at all.
So more of the burden falls on his wife.
We don't live a life, we exist. I feel let down and I get really down and teary about it all. You know, you just feel as if you're pushing a small pea up a large hill.
Picking up the pieces, charities like this one, working with disabled people and their families. There's advice and support, but no substitute for the costly care they need.
It's a dire situation. Families are stressed to the point of losing their jobs. We're in financial crisis. Relationships are breaking down. You almost have to be at complete breaking point before you're getting that support that you need.
So most days it's just Morgan and his mum against the world.
You can beg and beg and beg for help, but nobody ever wants to do it. It's because you need the help. You know, it's...
Mommy, Mama.
Morgan needs his nappy changing a dozen times a day. He can't be left safely alone, not even for a moment. He's 6 years old and severely autistic, locked in his own world, while Beth feels like a prisoner in hers.
Going out maybe once a week, if that, to somewhere other than these four walls.
Beth has asked for respite care, for someone simply to play with Morgan and his brother while she grabs some sleep. But the hard-pressed council says he doesn't qualify.
I get quite upset a lot of the time because I just think, am I doing a good enough job with them? You know, am I raising them the way they should be, and are they getting the help they need?
A lot of pressure, isn't it?
Yeah. What?
Hull's been called a social care desert. The council blames huge cuts in funding from central government. It says more money is urgently needed.
If there's a common thread that draws together the poverty we've seen in Liverpool, the housing shortage in Oldham, and the social care crisis here in Hull, it's this: that the years in which government has reined in public spending has exposed untold private agonies.
For many, social care has ceased to care. The Prime Minister has committed to fixing it.
We'll just soldier on as best we can. Because that's how we are, you've got to. What else can you do? No, you can't give up, can you?
But when MPs return to Westminster next week, Roy and Anne are unlikely to top their agenda. John Ray, News at 10, Hull.
What kind of world do we live in sometimes, guys? You know, the suffering and the pain and everything else around it all.
Spacecom will boldly deter aggression and outpace
Donald Trump's
America's
speech.
rivals by far.
Flanked by a new space commander, President Trump says America will beat all of its competitors.
Now, those who wish to harm the United States, to seek to challenge us in the ultimate high ground of space, it's going to be a whole different ballgame. Our adversaries are weaponizing Earth's orbits with new technology targeting American satellites that are critical to both battlefield operations and our way of life at home.
The goal is to confront Russian and, above all, Chinese space ambitions. Beijing sees huge economic and strategic opportunities beyond Earth. They have already put a lander on the far side of the moon and are planning the construction of a space station with dreams of accessing mineral and energy resources by intercepting asteroids. One former admiral says he backs Trump's move today, but it comes with a risk.
There is a need for the Space Command and for what's being stood up today. I think there's a genuine need for that when you think about what Russia and Iran and North
Looks a
Korea
bit like
and
Martin
China
McFly.
are all doing in space.
Back to the Future, the guy does.
To be a player
He sounds
in
like
that
him as well.
realm. But if what he's
You guys know what I
envisioning
mean?
for space
If you've
is
ever
for it
seen
to
Back
be
to the Future
nothing but competition,
film,
nothing but potential conflict, nothing but victory, winning or losing, then I think he's going to find some resistance.
Space Command will be the latest branch of the US military. The Pentagon says the strategy is to deter, defend, deliver, and develop warfighters in space. The threats are the jamming of GPS and communication systems and hostile missile attacks.
the thing has gone off, guys. So,
China and Russia are
TV's
seen
gone off.
as enemy.
Had to do it again. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know why the TV just went off again.
An experimental and classified space plane, part of a plan to be ready to wage and to win wars in space.
Wars in space.
As the new flag of the Space Command was unfurled, a debate has begun. Is this a presidential vanity project or a strategic necessity? Robert Moore, News at 10.
You think there'll be war in space? Who are they going to fight? Like Star Wars? Is it going to be aliens fighting in space? What the hell? Wars in space, eh? Just flicking through all the channels to see what else I can show. Ah!
A rare glimpse into the secretive world of stealth aircraft. 2 British F-35s, an American B-2 bomber wing to wing for the first time. Invisible to radar, they usually operate out of sight, capable of striking an enemy target without warning.
Almost 300 feet low.
We were given exclusive access to an American Air Force refueling tanker. Such is the sensitivity around the stealth bomber that in the air filming had to be done
It's
by
got half
a
playing,
US
half
military
frisbee.
camera team.
Triangle.
Just 10 feet apart while they refuel. This is precision flying, and it's dangerous. Stealth aircraft in the sky. Officially, this is, of course, a training mission, but it's also an example of how the West portrays its power to those who seek to do it harm. 3 B-2 bombers have been deployed for 2 months to RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire. It's the longest amount of time they've ever been here, and they come with a message.
This is a visual statement that any potential adversary, whether that's a nation, a violent extremist organization, or some other bad actor, that the United States and its allies, including the United Kingdom, can apply combat power anywhere, anytime.
That's a tough message.
It's a very powerful message, and we intend it to be.
America is watching as Russia increases its military presence in the Arctic region. The threat, they believe, comes from there and forms part of the US mission in Europe. Even though the B-2s are only here for 2 months, they want Russia to take note. The pilot may have their trigger finger on a nuclear payload, what the US might call the ultimate deterrent.
It's not lost on me the responsibility of that, and that's why we train so hard, and we definitely don't do it lightly, and hope that we never are called into combat. Honestly, every day I hope that we don't get that call.
President Trump might question NATO, or not seem as committed to the so-called special relationship with the UK as some would hope. But on the ground here, everyone appears united.
Deployments like this, the Bombing Task Force here to RAF Fairford, do give a really powerful message of the closeness of the alliance and the closeness of the United Kingdom and the United States. So if people are looking, I do hope they take notice of the strength of our partnership.
They carry the ability to cause irreparable and devastating destruction. But now it's training and war games. As they disappear into the sky, these top-secret planes leave having given notice that they are prepared for action. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10, Gloucestershire.
Well, just trying to find something else I can actually stream. Like I say, guys, I can't stream in the PS4 at the minute. Hopefully it's going to fix itself. If it doesn't, I'll be very pissed off. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm doing little pre-recorded videos like this. I'm trying to find what else I can actually show on YouTube as well. So, right, so let's...
Leader today. As the host of this summit, President Macron made the threat to the Amazon rainforest one of the central themes of the gathering. His final round table was noticeable for the absence of the US president. And as they met to agree a package that would see millions of pounds of aid made available, he first had to bring to order the British Prime Minister with a call which showed a degree of knowledge of the UK parliamentary system. Order! Maurice, order! At his press conference afterwards, the President emphasised the significance of the decision the summit had taken.
First and foremost, I'd like to announce that we will make available 20 million euros to the Amazon countries who have told us of their needs. France will also bring concrete military support to the region in the coming hours.
Boris Johnson promised £10 million to help reforest the Amazon, but said much more needed to be done.
If we don't act now, our children and our grandchildren will never know a world with the Great Barrier Reef or the Sumatran tiger or the black rhino.
But inevitably, he was asked about G7 attitudes towards Brexit.
You talk to our friends, as I have done in the last few weeks, and they are very enthusiastic about getting on with the future. They regard Brexit now as an encumbrance, an old argument. They want to talk about the new partnership that we're going to build. They want to talk about ways in which we can work together, as I said, not just on trade, but on security, on defence, on all kinds of things. And I think it's time that we in the UK started to think about all the ways in which we can think of a post Brexit Britain.
For Boris Johnson, you might just make him out on the far left of this family photograph. It was his first big outing on the world stage. He may look as if he's on the fringe here, but it's been a hectic round of high-level diplomacy. After promising noises on an international trade deal with the USA yesterday, he was glad handing it with Japan's leader today and making clear his intentions on Brexit.
As soon as we've got Brexit done, we'll go to the people in the UK. I want to make sure that we come to Japan. That would be something that you would welcome.
So that was his first overture to Japan. He also met the leader of the world's largest democracy, but with Narendra Modi, he was more circumspect about what they discussed. Making friends and influencing people also involved a handshake with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Then, on a brighter note, a meeting with the Australian Prime Minister and an acknowledgement that England won a spectacular victory against the Aussies in yesterday's cricket match. No doubt Boris Johnson is hoping for as big a win in any future trade negotiations. Downing Street will be pleased with this first high-profile venture abroad, but Boris Johnson will face tougher challenges ahead when MPs return to Westminster after their summer break in a week's time.
Well, President Trump wrapped up his appearance at the summit with a lengthy press conference covering everything from his strategy on trade with China to relations with Iran. And he even found time to promote one of his properties in Florida as the venue for next year's G7. Let's go live now to Danny Isdale, who's in Washington for us. Danny.
Well, it is the turn of the USA to host the next G7. So upon leaving this G7, Donald Trump shared an idea he has for a good location, one of his own properties, a golf resort in Miami. He said no other location could possibly come close, and when asked whether there's a concern he would profit from that arrangement, he said, "It's not about me, it's about finding the very best place." He also said he's open to making it a G8 again by inviting President Vladimir Putin of Russia. That is interesting, particularly in a 2020 campaign year when Russia remains accused of interfering in US elections. The line between friends and enemies can sometimes appear blurred with President Trump, but in France this week he has solidified one friendship in particular, and that is with Boris Johnson. He said he will make a great Prime Minister and that he's been waiting for him to get the job for 6 years.
And Boris is different. It's a different kind of a deal. Boris has to try and do something with Brexit. It's very tough. I deal with the EU. The EU that's a very, very strong group of people. They have their ideas, and they're not easy to deal with, I will tell you. We're very close to making a deal, by the way, with the EU. I have to say this. We made a great deal with Japan, and we're very close to maybe making a deal with the EU.
So, Danny, we know Iran's foreign minister was also at the G7. Any chance of Javad Zarif crossing paths with Donald Trump?
Well, President Trump said no, but he also made sure that he wanted all of us to understand that he knew at all times that the Iranian foreign minister would be attending and had been invited to Biarritz. What is more interesting, I think, though, is that now he's making noises that he would be more open to a meeting.
If the circumstances were correct toward the right, I would certainly agree to that. But in the meantime, they have to be good players. You understand what that means. And they can't do what they were saying they're going to do, because if they do that, they're going to be met with really very violent force. We have no choice. I didn't think it was appropriate to meet yesterday, too soon, and things have to be worked out first. But President Macron told me exactly what was happening, who was coming, what time they were coming, where they were going to meet. And after the meeting, he told me exactly what happened.
President Macron is now aiming to arrange such a meeting in the coming weeks between President Trump and President Rouhani. That is no small thing. There has been no meeting between American and Iranian leaders since before the 1979 Iran hostage crisis. President Trump also so often so critical of the way that Iranian assets were unfrozen as part of the nuclear deal. Well, now he seems open to considering supporting a short-term line of credit or a loan to Iran secured by oil. and that is certainly a long way from his current position and the sanctions that he's been imposing to now.
For nearly 3 weeks, fires have been raging in the Amazon rainforest. The vast majority has been set up by loggers and ranchers to clear land for cattle. They feel encouraged by President Bolsonaro's populist pro-agro business agenda, whose slashed funding of environmental agencies in charge of protecting the Amazon. Brazil is the largest exporter of beef in the world, providing close to 20% of total global exports, with more than $6.5 billion in revenue. Bolsonaro's mission is for this to increase. But after an international outcry and threats of boycotting Brazilian products, the president was obliged to send the military to tackle the fires. Today, we flew over one of the most affected areas. It was covered in smoke and we could hardly see in front of us. The pockets of fire are so spread out that it would be practically impossible to extinguish them unless the rain comes.
A sick planet cannot afford to damage a vital organ. If the world is to overcome climate change, it needs a healthy Amazon rainforest. But right now, it's suffocating. We are seeing a record number of fires spread across this vast landscape. 75,000 so far this year, 85% more than last year. And there are accusations that this is a self-inflicted wound.
No.
Farmers and loggers deliberately starting fires to illegally deforest the land.
We're flying to the state of Pará, one of the most deforested areas in the whole of the Amazon. Below there, huge farms, where once there was pristine forest. You can smell the smoke here. This is the frontier where the Amazon meets cattle ranching.
The response from activists and many politicians has been outrage. But much of this criticism is for Brazil's populist president, Jair Bolsonaro. He's accused of encouraging the destruction of the Amazon in order to boost Brazilian cattle farming.
Eles são os autênticos exterminadores do futuro sustentável. É Bolsonaro, é piromaníaco. E é uma pessoa que não tem nenhum apreço, nem pela verdade, nem pelo clima, nem pelos povos da floresta.
Despite the protests, President Bolsonaro retains large support across Brazil, especially among the people whose industry he's making a priority, the cattle ranchers. Outside the rural town of Alta Floresta, I went to meet Celso Bevilacqua. He's the owner of a vast cattle ranch, about 20 square miles of land, nearly half of which used to be rainforest.
E como isso para abrir a floresta? Tudo que queimar?
Motosserra e queimar. Celso tells me most of his beef is exported to large multinational chains. He's in favor of President Bolsonaro's policies and believes the reaction to the Amazon fires is overblown.
É uma fake news. O Brasil não está queimando a Amazônia. Nós temos algum incêndio que é feito em algumas regiões por causa da época de seca mesmo, como tem incêndios florestais na Europa, nas Ilhas Canárias que está tendo agora. É tudo uma grande mentira. Então, existem grandes inverdades na questão da Amazônia. O maior interesse da Amazônia é que a Amazônia fique virgem, intocável, para a comunidade internacional no futuro tomar conta dela.
Você crê que Bolsonaro representa a maioria dos brasileiros?
No mínimo 80%. O Jair Messias Bolsonaro, o nosso presidente, tem o nome Messias. Messias é o libertador.
Such idolization appears out of step with the growing global condemnation of the president's response to the crisis. But there are many Brazilians who believe the Amazon is theirs and do not appreciate foreigners telling them what to do with it. While the forest continues to burn, tens of thousands of troops have now been dispatched to help local firefighters put out the flames. As the battle goes on, the world will watch with concern. Climate change now means a problem in one country is often a problem for all.
Kick-off time, 5 p.m. sharp. Molotovs, tear gas. It's an asymmetric war. The protesters laid traps, fishing line tied low across streets for Robocops to trip on, sprinkled soybeans and marbles and soap suds for Robocops to slip on. The swirling CS gas stings your skin. But these are hardened street warriors now. They've all got masks and they run rings around the police. Police deployed their new water cannon for the first time tonight in Chungwan, on Hong Kong's Kowloon Peninsula. Triad territory, it said, the gangsters accused of doing Beijing's dirty work. On Yung Uk Road, teenaged protesters had barricaded themselves inside City Walk shopping centre. They taunted the riot police, some using lasers. The police stood there, watching, deciding in the end just to ignore them. Many of those in here look like school kids. As the Hong Kong night dropped like a curtain, the Special Tactical Squad suddenly charged, sending hard-hatted black shirts galloping up Yung Uk Road, pounded by tankers. Stragglers were pinned down and arrested. The social worker there to support young detainees was pushed back by police and refused access. One of those arrested tonight was a 12-year-old boy. Hong Kong Police Superintendent Justin Shave was among ground commanders tonight. He's a Brit, who he also filmed directing ops elsewhere in Kowloon last night.
Superintendent, can I just ask you what's actually happening here and what are you going to do about the situation tonight?
We're doing clearances, you can see.
So you're clearing out street by street, and then?
After that, you best contact the Police Public Relations Bureau.
Commander Shave has been under fire here for his tactics, including the frequent use of tear gas and baton rounds.
You've been accused by the protesters, sir, of acting for the government of Beijing.
I think you've mistaken me for somebody else.
I don't think so, sir.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Enough.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
At the top of Yung Uk, a phalanx of riot police now held the junction. At this point, Justin Shave joined his British colleague, Senior Superintendent David Jordan, both men central to these police operations.
So these standoffs have now become part of a regular pattern every day, every weekend. And interestingly, more than 7 out of 10 Hong Kongers now blame the pro-Beijing Hong Kong government for this chaos. Fewer and fewer of them see the protesters as being responsible for excessive violence. The government is seen to be increasingly remote and arrogant, and pro-democracy sentiment here is hardening.
There were chaotic wildcat protests in at least 4 other locations in Kowloon tonight. A shot was fired. Police have not confirmed whether it was a live round. At the time, protesters were savagely beating ordinary police in Shan Shui Po district. The policemen came back, pointing pistols, kicking a man who'd been pleading with them to back down. There's absolutely no doubt this is all escalating. In another clash, several policemen were injured tonight. With less than 6 weeks to go before the big 70th anniversary celebrations for China's Communist Party, Beijing does not want trouble. It will probably avoid the hardline option here. For now.
These summits are about choreography, and staircases compose a challenge. The host flings off his jacket
Well,
with exuberance.
goes to show.
The president hates descending, even from small heights. And the new guy on the block is still finding his way. But nothing is as tricky as trying to stay in sync with Donald Trump and his phobias. Watch that body language.
You know who this is? Does everybody know?
I'm going to try and find some different news now, I think. We've done quite a few bits of news on here. So, 5 minutes ago, Hong Kong.
They turned out in their thousands, despite this rally being banned. Young and old, even children were there. They weren't going to stop demanding democracy. But there was evident anger and frustration. A billboard marking the 70th anniversary of communist rule in China was ripped down, and all along the way they sprayed graffiti.
If they suppress us more, we'll resist more. And if they try to kill us with the violence, just let us burn together.
And it didn't take long for that to happen. This is the seat of the Hong Kong government. There's a lot of anger over how the authorities have handled this, and this is the 13th consecutive week of protests, with them getting ever more violent. The water cannon used this time had blue dye to stain protesters who could be picked up later.
The protesters and the demonstrators taking part in this seem to be getting more and more hardened and more determined and more angry.
The protesters handed out rocks to throw at the police. We saw them using catapults to aim marbles. And they threw back gas canisters fired in their direction, as well as lobbed petrol bombs. Streets in the heart of this, one of the world's leading financial hubs, were shut down as astonished tourists and shoppers looked on aghast at the scenes unfolding in front of them. Time and again, the protesters were able to outwit the police, at one stage building and setting alight a large barricade around the corner from the police headquarters.
This has been a tactic. They've moved around. The demonstrators, they hit something quickly and then move to a different area. And it's quite difficult to police. Well, master of the understatement, it's extremely difficult to police.
The authorities struggled to bring the situation under control as pictures of Hong Kong burning swept around the world. In this video we were given, protesters claim the men in black are undercover police officers mingling with demonstrators. And protesters say 2 live rounds were fired into the air, claims we can't verify. Then the riot police, led by a small contingent of British officers, moved in en masse. And they were determined to make some arrests. This is what many protesters fear most, with repeated claims of police brutality and sexual violence against the women once they're out of sight of witnesses.
So what's happening here? They're checking whether they are media, because people have been masquerading as media. Why are you questioning him? Why
I have to check his identity, right?
Right? No, he's clearly marked as press.
He's
clearly marked as press.
If he takes press can also wear this mask. Is it possible? Yes or no?
Are you getting control of the streets?
At this stage, no, they weren't. So they went on the offensive. And as protesters headed for a train station, this happened. The sight of young people cowering, begging not to be hit by police, is not a good look for Hong Kong. This was a very black day for Hong Kong. And the violence is escalating on both sides, with no end in sight, and the situation getting more and more out of control. Alex Crawford, Sky News, Hong Kong.
Well, violence, there's more and more violence in the world. Some people like to live in a peaceful world, but more people make it worse.
Once more, thousands have taken to Moscow's streets to protest against Vladimir Putin's government. They're demanding that elections to the city legislature that are scheduled for September the 8th are held freely and that opposition candidates can stand. Lyubov Sobol, who has been banned from running, led the protest in defiance. Last time she attempted to join a protest, she was arrested. We want to show that all these protests, all these night searches of the candidates, all These detentions of students do not work. Society will not step back. We're stronger because we're local and will be seeking the respect of our rights. People see that the elections are being fabricated, and this has happened for a very long time. It happens systematically. That cannot be tolerated. The protesters are now also calling for the release of activists detained during previous rallies. Saturday's protest is the last before the vote, and it was smaller than some of the previous ones, which have attracted tens of thousands of people.
Protesting in, wasn't it?
Are Colombia's FARC rebels returning to war? Former commanders issued a call to arms, accusing the government of betraying the 2016 peace deal. So can the accord be saved, or will peace be shattered again? This is Inside Story.
I don't know if this is going to be a long video. It says 3 hours ago, this video, guys. It's 25 minutes it's going to be on for. So it could be a long video. I've already done about, literally done 50 minutes of video.
Hello everyone, I'm Kamal Santa Maria. Welcome to Inside Story. We're talking Colombia today, which for the past 3 years has looked to be on the path to peace after more than 50 years of war with the FARC leftist rebels. But that peace is now under threat from one of the same men who agreed to it. Let's rewind to 2016, the signing ceremony where the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, agreed to lay down their arms in a
Colombia war for 50 years, guys. Who would have believed it? A long time, eh?
Santos. The whole thing even earned him a Nobel Peace Prize, while the FARC's lead negotiator, Ivan Marquez, promised Colombians a new era of hope. But now, just 3 years later, he is urging FARC members to pick up their weapons again, saying the government has betrayed the deal.
When we signed the agreement of Havana, we did it with the conviction that it was possible to change the lives of the humble and the dispossessed. But the state has not fulfilled even the most important of the obligations, that is to guarantee the life of its citizens and particularly to prevent their murder for political reasons. All of this trick, this betrayal, this perfidy, the unilateral modification of the text of the accord, the unfulfilled commitments on the part of the state, the judicial setups and insecurity have obliged us to return to the mountains.
Colombia's current president, meanwhile, has announced a special army unit to find and arrest the FARC rebels. Soldiers killed 9 members in one raid on Friday.
I authorized the Joint Command of Special Operations to carry out an offensive operation against this gang of narco-terrorist criminals who are residuals of what was known as the FARC and who are part of the criminal structures that now seek to challenge Colombia. Well, last night, thanks to meticulous and strategic work, Delgado Cucho, a leader of that organization, was killed.
That was Ivan Duque. Ivan Marquez, who you saw a moment ago, was a key negotiator in the peace agreement, which was signed almost 3 years ago. Around 13,000 FARC members demobilized. That included around 7,000 soldiers who laid down their arms. As part of the deal, they were promised help reintegrating back into civilian society. FARC was also turned into a political party. It was assigned 10 seats in Colombia's Congress. But hundreds of social leaders, human rights activists, and former FARC members have been killed in the past 3 years. And some analysts say the FARC has also fallen short on its commitment to justice. The leadership's been accused of continuing to traffic drugs and failing to provide their victims with reparations. So here is today's panel, all joining us from Bogota, the capital of Colombia. On Skype, we have got Sergio Guzman, who is the Director of Colombia Risk Analysis. We have Jorge Restrepo, the Director of CERAC, the Conflict Analysis Resource Center, and also on Skype, Daniel Garcia Peña, who is the Professor of Political Science at the National University and a former High Commissioner for Peace of Colombia. Gentlemen, welcome to all three of you. I am conscious that the story of the FARC rebels and the peace deal is not something all of our viewers are going to be completely up to speed on, so I just want to spend a few minutes with you sort of
explaining a bit more about some of the main players and what's happened in the last 3 years. Sergio, I'll start with you. Tell me about Ivan Marquez. Tell our viewers about Ivan Marquez, and particularly right now, how strong is his voice? How influential is he? Does he have people, numbers on his side?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. Good morning to Jorge and Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here. To begin, Ivan Marquez is a person that has a very long political background. He used to be a member of the House of Representatives under the Unión Patriótica Party back in the day in the 1990s, before he returned to conflict with the FARC in the late 1990s. He participated in the negotiations in El Caguán and then was the lead negotiator of the negotiations in Havana. So this man is a person who has a very long-standing political background and is well-versed both in letters but also in fighting. He's believed to be very close with Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro as well. If you look at the video and if you look at the numbers, the video really had two things to say. First, it was an aspirational video. It demonstrated that the FARC wants to reach out to other members of society, particularly their former fighters, disgruntled members of civil society living in rural areas who feel that they haven't been dealt the right cards under the peace agreement, for instance, with land reparations or with a change in the drug policy, etc. So he's casting a wide net. More importantly, he also reaches out to the ELN. But this is an important point. His video doesn't suggest that he has an alliance with the ELN or he has important support from these members. He's not demonstrating it. And if the video is a show of strength in terms of military might, having 30 people armed to the teeth, in particular a blind man like Jesus Santrich, isn't going to be very scary. Although in the video there's individuals like alias El Paisa who belong to a very fearful Teófilo Forero column, which was responsible for a lot of terrorist attacks and very intrusive, but it doesn't demonstrate capacity in and of itself.
Okay, thank you for all of that. Let's go to Jorge now. Jorge, Marquez said in that video, well, he said a lot of things, but one of the things he said, the betrayal from the government has obliged us to return to the mountains. What exactly does that mean?
Well, I mean, first, thank you very much, Kemal, for having us. Hello to Sergio and Daniel. I reckon that Ivan Marquez, it's basically trying to instill fear in the Colombian population, but this is a threat that still has not materialized. And all his discourse, it's basically a very well staged composition in order to present himself as a leader of an emerging guerrilla. But one has to be really careful in assessing this as a threat. I do believe that there is a higher risk, but nevertheless, what they're trying to accomplish with this is basically to avoid persecution by justice authorities from transitional justice here in Colombia, but also from the justice of the United States that it's accusing one of them, Santrich, and maybe himself, Ivan Marquez, for narco-trafficking, international narco-trafficking crimes. Then basically I reckon one has to be very, very careful in not overstating the level of threat that this group poses to the Colombian society and economy.
Okay, and Daniel, let's bring you into the conversation as well. I wonder if you can tell us about the other Ivan Duque, who is now the Colombian leader. He did not sign the peace deal. Obviously, that was his predecessor. But can you again explain to us what his position on the deal has been? Because now he is speaking with a very strong tone and saying, we're going after the FARC.
Well, yes. First of all, thank you. And also, I want to say hello to Jorge and Sergio. No doubt, Ivan Duque was elected president by a coalition that came together to oppose the peace process. Remember that back in 2016, we had a referendum in the country, and a coalition that voted no and was able to win that vote was precisely the same coalition that elected Ivan Duque. Since assuming the presidency, he has modified the discourse that he had during the campaign of doing away with the agreement, and has had a on one hand has been committed to fulfilling the agreement as far as the reincorporation of the FARC rebels, but as far as the broader aspects of the agreement, the issues of land reform, the issues of the drug trade and political reform, there has been no movement whatsoever. And on the contrary, earlier this year, President Duque tried to veto parts of the transitional justice system in Colombia that was overridden by the Congress. But nevertheless, it's clear that the government does not have a commitment to the process, and on the contrary, many of the actions on the part of the government simply have gone against the implementation. So this act on the part of Iván Márquez and his group it will strengthen the discourse of the government and their military reaction against these new FARC rebels will no doubt increase the tension within the country and also against this new group.
Gentlemen, let's look at some of the reasoning then, now that we've sort of laid out some of the background, the reasoning here. Marquez says the government has betrayed the deal. The government would say of the FARC, hey, you've continued to traffic drugs, you've continued to betray the deal as well. Is it one of these? Okay, I'm going to go to Jorge, because you're shaking your head there. Tell me why.
Yeah, I mean, because one cannot say that the government of Iván Duque has betrayed the agreement or has repudiated the agreement, not in its totality nor in its part. Although, implementation, it's quite complex, institutionally, organizationally, financially, economically. It is a rather huge task, one has to say, and that will take at least 15 years in terms of the implementation. Although there has been attempts by the government party, which is a minority party in Congress, to take apart by pieces, especially the jurisdiction for peace, the transitional justice system that, as Daniel referred. One cannot say that there is a concerted effort to be able to tear apart or to repudiate the agreement. And this is very important. That does not justify the rearming of this group of ex-FARC leaders. One has to be very careful again with that in terms of not creating a new discourse for the justification of coming back to violence here in Colombia. That's why I shake my head.
Okay, Sergio, let me come back to you then. Maybe it's just, or maybe you'd like to comment on what Jorge said, but maybe it's also just that, after so many years of war, there's just an inherent distrust between both sides, and they're not going to see eye to eye, and they're not going to believe the other side can stay true to the deal.
Look, I'll say this. The blame on returning to war lies solely on the FARC in their decision to rearm. Having said that, I disagree with what Jorge is saying in the sense that I do think that the government has been lukewarm in its support of the entirety of the peace agreement. The government is very supportive of the disarmament, the demobilization, and reincorporation component of the agreement, but is much less enthusiastic about the chapter on land reform, the chapter on the trade of illegal drugs, the political participation of FARC members, as well as the justice component, which was mentioned earlier. I think that both sides have some legitimate claim to attest that the counterparty is not making the threshold for the compliance with the peace agreement, but it would be far-fetched to say that they both share an equal amount of blame. I think that in their decision to rearm, the FARC is definitely taking a heavy stance, but they're also condemning themselves, and they're putting at risk a lot of the former combatants who are still incorporating the process, who are participating in politics, and who are campaigning for the local elections, which are taking place on October 27th, coupled with the killings of social leaders that have happened in Colombia. This endangers them all.
Daniel, your thoughts? Is it going to, I mean, you're coming from a position as well as a former High Commissioner for Peace in Colombia. I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing you would place more blame on the FARC here in the way that Sergio has?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to be very, very careful. I don't think we can talk about the FARC or Ivan Marquez is the leader of the FARC. Let's not forget that this is a splinter group. He represents a small faction of the FARC. The vast majority of the FARC is with the peace process. Close more than 90% of the fighters are committed to the peace process. The leader of the FARC, Timochenko, has come out very, very clearly in favor of supporting the process. So I think it's I would be very careful not to allow Marquez to monopolize the name of FARC. The FARC is with the peace process. It's a splinter group, a relatively small group, part of the group that has decided to rearm. But I think it's vital for everybody to understand that the vast majority of FARC and the FARC leadership, with the exception of Marquez and Santrich and others, but the vast majority of them are committed to the process and are committed to continue in the political process, in the democratic process. So I think that does not mean that this is not an important blow to the process. There's no doubt that politically speaking, the message that Ivan Marquez is giving is going to definitely hurt the process. But I think it would be not correct to give this group the right to speak in name of the FARC. They are trying to relive the FARC. They are trying to somehow rekindle the elements that led to the rise of FARC 50 years ago. But I think that today, the conditions of the country, the vast majority, not only of the FARC members, but of Colombian society, reject the armed struggle and hope that the majority of the FARC members will continue with the peace process.
Jorge, you're itching to get in there. Go ahead.
Yes, Kamal, if I may, I want to reinforce that point in the following way. This is not that we are going back to conflict. This is not the emergence of a new guerrilla group. What is happening here is that there is a very small group of commanders, a minority, most radical of them, those that fear the most from prosecution, either from transitional justice here in Colombia or from the international justice in the United States for narco-trafficking crimes. And what they're trying to put forward is a discourse to try to instill fear in the Colombian society while they try to organize this escape from justice. And something which is very important is that they're doing this from Venezuela, from the border from Venezuela maybe, because that is their hideaway. That is the way that they can organize this crime. But we are not going back to conflict. We are not seeing the emergence of a new guerrilla group. We, as Sergio mentioned, we are not seeing this alliance with the ELN in itself. We are not seeing yet violence, and we have to be aware of the risks, but not throw away the baby with bathtub. You know, it's more than 95% of ex-combatants, and I will say the entirety of the leaders, but for this handful of leaders of the FARC, are committed with peace, and the trust that the Colombian society has put on this peace process, it's, I will say, rather solid. The stability of peace is not threatened by the emergence of this group.
Okay, then. So in that case, and I'll put this to all three of you.
If I may, Kamal,
just quickly, Sergio.
There's a nomenclature issue because the name FARC, when the armed group made the peace deal with the government, they started a political party, and they could have named that political party whatever it is that they wanted to name it. And there was a discussion internally, and then they decided to name it FARC. And now that Ivan Marquez is starting the splinter group, like Daniel pointed out, they chose to go with exactly the same name. So there is a lot of room for confusion here, and I think that we do have the responsibility to make the distinction between all of them.
Okay, maybe this still leads to the point I was going to make. Rather than all of this being about the risk of returning to war, let's flip it on its head and say that there's an opportunity here. If Ivan Duque ran on the idea of renegotiating the deal, is this actually a chance to do that, to renegotiate it, to firm up what you were just saying, Jorge, the fact that a lot of people still support this deal and it shouldn't all just fall apart because of one man? Daniel, I'll start with you. What is is there an opportunity here?
I think there's an opportunity not to renegotiate, but to implement what was agreed upon. The agreement establishes elements that have to do with the reincorporation, and I think, and I agree with the other members of the panel, that in fact the government, President Duque, has committed to going forward with the reincorporation, which is a good thing. I think that we all agree on that. But unfortunately, the agreement is not only about reincorporation. The agreement included a very important aspect of land reform. This is a conflict that has to do with years and years of dispossession of land and rights for the peasants. That issue has been just completely ignored by the government. Issues that have to do with the drug trade, with political reform. So I think it's an opportunity for the government to understand that the best way to move forward is to implement and to actually not only for the FARC. I think that many times we look at the agreement as an agreement that is favoring FARC or is in favor of FARC, but the agreement has many things that are in favor of Colombian society, especially the peasants and the countryside. And that is where I think the government has to act more clearly in favor of implementing the agreement. And I think that would be the best way, not only to for the Colombian state to fulfill its commitments, but also to take away all these arguments that Ivan Marquez and his group have signaled out to justify supposedly their decision to take up arms. So I think it is an opportunity. Unfortunately, we have not seen the government willing to move forward on the peace process. But I do believe that this situation, as in fact Timochenko, the leader of the FARC, pointed out, he said this was a very bad news for the country, but there was a good side that it clarifies who's with the process and who is not with the process. And I think that now Duque has the responsibility to, with the FARC leadership that is with the peace process, that is committed to continue with the peace process, to in fact move forward in the implementation.
Jorge, can Duque do this on his own? I don't like this word, but bilateral, between the government and the FARC, or does there need to be a third party, some sort of broker?
Well, I reckon there is no interest or political capacity in the Centro Democrático government, the party of Ivan Duque, nor capacity of negotiation in his government to move forward or to try to open up the agreement. Also, the agreement is quite well tied legally, constitutionally, even by international law standards, to think that we are going to see changes or a renegotiation. He's, on the other side, not on speaking terms at party level with the FARC party. I reckon, going back to your previous question or line of questioning, that this is indeed an opportunity that the Colombian society has to catalyze an acceleration of the implementation of the agreement, especially on those areas in terms of rural reform, development plans that are needed to sustain peace building in rural areas, in the regions that have been affected by the conflict and other forms of violence. I'm rather less optimistic about the role of transitional justice. Although there is also pressure now, increased pressure for this transitional justice system in all its components, truth-seeking, proper justice persecution and the seeking of the disappeared to be much more quicker, to act much more quicker. I reckon that we have a really badly designed justice system in Colombia, including the transitional justice system. And on that side, I'm less optimistic. And if something is going to fail on this peace process, I reckon it's going to be justice.
Gentlemen, it's been an enlightening discussion with you. I started wondering about the prospects for war, but finished it by thinking about the framework still being there for peace. I want to thank you all for your contributions today. Really enjoyed it. And thank you as well for joining us for this edition of Inside Story. Plenty more for you online. Inside Stories in the shows section at aljazeera.com if you want to see this or any of our discussions again. We're also at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. We're on Twitter at AJ Inside Story. I'm at Kamal AJE if you want to message me directly. From the whole team, thanks for joining us. See you again soon.
Well, that was a long video. I think I can leave this video at this now, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. Please like, comment, subscribe. Share these videos with your friends. We'll be back for another video. I'm still annoyed I can't stream on PS4, but eventually I'm hoping it's going to fix it and everybody else's will fix itself as well. Then they can stream too. Take it easy, guys. Peace. Till later.